This podcast is brought to you by AliExpress. Use the offer code on screen and click those links in the description to get to their new sale and save big on orders over $100. And it is also brought to you by cdkeyoffer.com. Use offer code BrokenSilicon to save 25% on Microsoft software and Die Shrink to save 3% on everything else on the website. And we'll talk about these sponsors more later. But for now, let's just get on with the show. And welcome to Broken Silicon, a gaming hardware podcast. I am your host, Tom, and today, as I am pretty much always on a news episode, well, let's just say always on a news episode, joined by my co-host,
Dan, except for maybe that one time it didn't happen.
I was going to say, but I think this was, again, my memory could be off, but I thought this was, I want to say it was like mid-2021 or something, where like you had a thing where you didn't have a lot of time to do it, but you were still like in the first 40 minutes of the episode, but not the entire one. I think this is like the one time you missed a news episode.
Yes, there was only half one weird time.
So we can just say you're always here.
Nope, the exception is the only thing that matters.
Except, well, I mean, if you look at people in the comments, that seems to be what a lot of people think about a lot of recent news stories. But how are you doing, Dan?
I'm pretty good. How are you doing, Tom?
You know, I had a fun weekend. A friend visited. We saw Ryan Hamilton. Cannot recommend seeing him enough. Although I will say, if you look him up, he has a special on Netflix called Happy Face, and very highly rated, very funny. I remember it. He definitely is a new vibe right now. Although, as he explains when we saw him live, it's because he was hit by a bus. So maybe his outlook on some things has changed a little bit. Just off the top of my head, one of my favorite jokes I heard him say was he got up after being hit by a bus, and he said people did not like that. They're like, stop being a zombie. Lay down, you idiot. You're scaring the children.
Well, I mean, I guess that would be a pretty shocking thing to see someone just stand up after getting hit by a bus. I don't know. You expect there's some type of spinal injury or something, but hey, it's good he can still walk, I guess.
But, you know, and then I leaned over to our friend, actually, Jeremy, and I said, yeah, people acted like that when I was in a motorcycle accident. Like I was thrown headfirst into concrete at like 40 miles an hour. But I had just fully decked out in like everything to protect yourself, besides those like inflatable bags that pop up around you. Like I had the helmets, Kevlar, you know, stuff like padding around my spine and everything. And so then I just stood up after being there, and then there were several people that were just like, oh my God. And I'm like, I'm fine. And everyone was like, what? And I'm like, no, I'm fine. I went to a meeting later that day.
Meanwhile, if you'll remember this event, Tom, one time I was hit by a car.
That's right.
Not very fast. It was only going like probably 5 miles per hour. So it wasn't like super significant. But one time while I was on a bike, like a bicycle, not a motorbike, a car hit me. They said, "Are you okay?" I said yes, and they sped off to contrast the two situations.
Yeah. Well, the person that caused me to crash on the motorcycle did speed off, for the record.
Oh, that's
but
good.
Other people helped me, including one nice person that I don't even know if I got his name, but like helped me put the motorcycle in his van, drove me back to my apartment, and made sure I was fine. So there are good Samaritans out there. Seems often not the people that hit you, because they don't want to take responsibility, though, for being entirely honest here.
Yes, that is the lesson I learned. If you are ever hit by a car, listeners, don't tell them you're okay.
Well, you know, and I guess what I'm all getting to here is after, you know, Ryan Hamilton, me, you, people get hit by stuff and live. Like, surprisingly, an astounding amount of time. You'd be surprised. But it's both surprising how little something can just kill a person, but also how much we can randomly take if it's at the right angle.
Oh yeah, I mean, I know. Like I was hit straight on in the ankle by a car. Sure, it was going slow, but I had zero injuries really. I think I got a bruise on my ankle. My foot was numb for about an hour, so I thought it might be broken, but nope, I was fine.
Well, I suppose on that note, though, we should get to the first story here since we don't have any corrections for today. With a story that is about graphics cards getting hit by a bus. With story number 1, Alan Wake 2 cuts off official support for older GPUs. Kinda. All right, now here is the write-up. Well, Alan Wake 2 is out, and to very positive reviews. However, it is out to a bit of controversy, namely demanding a user's GPU support mesh shaders for optimized performance. Now, that wording I just used, optimize mesh shaders for optimized performance, it might sound odd and specific, but it is for very good reason. You see, the game was built to utilize mesh shaders. And while the devs say they technically require it, as demonstrated by Hardware Unboxed, the 5700 XT and Titan Pascal can certainly boot and technically run the game. But this is where things get interesting. The 2060 Super, a card that usually lost to the 5700 non-XT and raster, actually beats the 5700 XT by a whopping 20 to 40%, depending on the scene and resolution. However, also interesting, the 5700 XT beats Titan X Pascal, something that traditionally would have been a solid, I don't know, 20% stronger at least, by an insane 50 to 80%. Demonstrating that the 5700 XT with its primitive shaders does actually age far better than older architectures besides Turing. Indeed, Turing does run the game much better than RDNA 1, relatively speaking, but it is also notable the 5700 XT equivalent cards do struggle to run this game fairly well. So with the 5700 XT at low settings, which both Hardware Unboxed and Digital Foundry said, low settings looks good on Alan Wake 2, though. Like, it looks like high settings on most games.
A new game from that has good graphics, so that's not really that big of a surprise.
No, I guess not. But, you know, with low settings, the 5700 XT, I don't know. It depends if you use FSR or not, or exactly what's seen. But it typically runs at 30 to 45 frames per second. And so, yeah, I mean, the 2060 Super runs it better, but it's still struggling to even hold an average of 50 frames per second usually, which Hardware Unboxed argued, and I would agree, that any argument that Turing is now proven to be a good purchase for future proofing is a dubious claim still, because it's still like all of these cards, besides probably the 2080 Ti, are still pretty much struggling to run this game well. So the argument being, it's kind of an oddity. It's interesting to see the 5700 XT aged much better than Pascal, but not as well as Turing. But really, all of these cards aren't an ideal experience. Meanwhile, it is also incredibly interesting to note that while some outlets are comparing the 3080 to the PS5, which I thought was weird that they used the 3080 at Digital Foundry, but the latter uses a more custom geometry engine than the Xbox Series X, the PS5 does, with its own benefits and drawbacks. It's even arguably a worse situation for the PS5 design. I'm sorry, let me back up. This is basically a worst case scenario for the PlayStation 5, you would argue, because it doesn't have direct mesh shader support in the way like the Series X does or RDNA 2 does. But that's because it has its own custom geometry engine with clearly far superior than normal primitive shaders and something else going on. And it's interesting to note that although people claim the PS5 doesn't support mesh shaders and is therefore behind, it seems to outperform the 3060 in this game, relatively speaking. Like, if you compare, like, the 3080 is usually over double the performance of a 3060, and I have a graph we'll put on screen for that. The PS5 is not half the performance of the 3080, suggesting that whatever Sony did with the geometry engine seems to work. And although the Xbox Series X outperforms the PS5 here, it really should. This is like an ideal situation for the Xbox Series X architecture. You know, it's a somewhat linear game with heavy ray tracing, mesh shaders. These are all the things I've always heard that Xbox Series X should probably do a little better than the PS5. But oddly enough, it only seems to perform slightly better. So there you go. In all honesty, the only remaining thing to say about this game is that if we're being honest, the 3-year-old consoles are both still running the game pretty well relative to last-gen hardware, given their age. And it is this writer's opinion that the game isn't unoptimized at all. It's just actually hard to run because it has crazy graphical effects. So I did think we had to discuss this as a main story, both because I thought there's really interesting hardware comparisons, but also this is probably the start of a new trend of stuff pre-Turing not really being, just being old architectures, not really meant to handle the next gen of rendering, is what I'd put it.
I mean, the good news is, though, I would say if you have like a RDNA 1 or earlier card or a pre-Turing card, you might want to look into upgrading pretty soon. I mean, it's relatively old hardware, and I mean, I guess it's good that this game, even though it doesn't officially support it, it still seems to work on that older gen hardware, albeit not that great. But it's good that it still works, and I think it would have been. I think it would have been. The announcement would have been met with a little bit less derision if it were more clear what it means by it doesn't support it. Like the performance for raster doesn't really hold up to where you'd think it would, based on how it typically performs in other games. So, I mean, at the end of the day, it's kind of just an outlier game for older hardware. Yeah. No, I mean, in performance, it's an outlier game. And yeah, I'm sure that's going to start being the case more and more often now that primitive shaders or pre-mesh shaders aren't going to be supported in more and more games as time goes on. So yeah, if you're on a 5700 XT, I don't know. I think there's a lot of decent cards out right now. I'd look into getting one.
Yeah, and I mean, at the end of the day, look, we're talking about something, the 5700 XT, that's 4 years old, over 4 years old, and it's really comparable in performance to the latest like $200 cards, or the cards currently selling for $200. Well, they have a ton better features for running this, So I don't know. There's been a lot of opportunities to upgrade here. I think Hardware Unboxed pointed out that during the mining boom of like 2021 or something, you could apparently have sold a 5700 XT used for almost the price of a 6700 XT, and that would have been a perfect scenario to swap to the newer thing. But let me see here. Deadeyes 117 writes in and says, seems like most games tend to run very similarly between the PS5 and the Series X, often even favoring the PS5 lately. However, early coverage is showing Alan Wake 2 to run better on the Series X than the PS5. Initially, I saw these headlines, and I was thinking this must finally be Microsoft's inclusion of mesh shaders paying off. When I look back at it, Digital Foundry found that running unlocked frame rates in the photo mode showed the Series X to average about 16% better performance. So that's not giant. Maybe the Northlight engine is just generally favorable to the Xbox hardware more than in other games. What is your take, and why do you think PS5 seems to handle a lack of mesh shaders so well relative to PC components like the 5700 XT seems not to? Well, it's because the PS5 has a custom architecture and geometry engine, which this completely disproves the notion that the PS5 is using RDNA 1.5. It's pretty much performing in a worst case scenario like RDNA 2 should. Like that's what we're seeing here. And the way Sony designed this is, again, this is what devs tell me. This is just what they told me, is it seems to handle geometry in a really streamlined and really quick way that is easier to program. And Sony came to the conclusion the fact that you had to specifically program mesh shaders meant that it wasn't the direction to go in their opinion, that they wanted to take some of the whatever other ways you could do it. But a lot of people suggest to me there's some enhancements in there that's in RDNA 3 or later or whatever. And they said, well, let's just take those enhancements and skip mesh shaders and make it something that gets similar performance, but you don't have to program for it. That's my understanding. And I feel like Alan Wake 2 proves that has to be going on.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, it's just if you look at the raw compute performance of the two consoles, it looks like in this specific game, the Series X outperforms the PS5 about as much as you'd expect, and they've optimized.
Yeah, it's almost is it almost linear with teraflops? Let me look at that.
I think if I'm remembering correctly, the Series X has 20% higher compute.
It has 16.5% higher teraflops. This is literally linear with teraflops, showing that the PlayStation 5 does not have a mesh shader disadvantage. This is just a perfect case scenario where teraflops are better leveraged, where the Xbox's segmented memory isn't as much of an issue because it's not a big open world game, and this is the scenario where it performs exactly that much better.
Yeah, I mean, looking at what Digital Foundry showed, I mean, to me, it just looks like this is a pretty well-made game with pretty good implementation of upscaling. I mean, it looks great on everything. I think it looks good in performance mode, even if it's using a low input resolution. I don't know. It still looks good. It looks basically identical on both consoles, even if during gameplay, you're going to get more frame rate dips on the PS5, which, I don't love, but that's why if I get it, I'll probably get it for PC.
This seems like a game, get it for PC though, which Digital Foundry said the same thing. This is a PC showcase game. This is the game where get it on PC, not console.
Oh yeah, I mean it's a showcase game in general. I do think it's showcases how well the consoles are aging too, though. Just given how good the game looks on both of them. Although it is not ideal that they're using like a sub 1440p input resolution for the quality mode. It would be better if it was like 1440p upscaled to 4K or 4K native, but neither console is at the power that they can do that, I guess.
Yeah, and it is interesting because if I look at, one interesting thing to note is there seems to be a bizarre thing where they make you look at the splash screen on the PlayStation 5, but not on the Xbox. I just thought I'd throw that out there. That's weird to me. But outside of that, it's like when I saw the low input resolution, I was a little surprised because I do think the game looks serviceable on the consoles. And, when I see this image quality, all I can do is go, look, I mean, compared to RDNA 1 or Turing at the time, the 2060 Super is like really struggling to run this game well. The PS5 clearly gets you performance almost to a 3060 Ti, whereas the Series X gets you probably just below a 3070's performance for the price of, an entire 3070 is what the Series X cost. So when people think this is bad, it's like, these are $500 consoles that are 3 years old. This is what you should start to expect. What this shows is, guys, we're halfway through the console generation. We have way stronger PC hardware now, and now is where it's going to finally be obvious that PCs are stronger. We're finally getting there.
Yeah, and that always happens mid-console gen. There's the reversal of there's a reversal of performance where in price performance where it starts out at early in a console gen. The consoles look really, really appealing, and now, given their price, and now we're getting closer to the inflection point because, PC hardware is just really outweighing what the consoles have. And then in the next few years, there's probably going to be an increase in interest in building new PCs as people on console are going to be starting to get tired of their compared to PC crappy console performance. Although I don't think the PS5 or Series X are going to age poorly. We'll see, though.
I don't think so either. I guess it's all relative, though. Like, what do we think aging poorly means? Because I feel like if you go to the PS4, Xbox One generation, it's a different situation compared to now, of course. Like, I think the PS4 was a 1080p 30 console, sometimes 900p to 1080p 60. Yeah. I mean, it's basically still that, like a 1080p 30 console. It's pretty much still that. The Xbox One was a 720p 30 or 900p 30, you might say, console. And that one's aging a bit worse. I mean, it's kind of turning into a 640p 30 console. But I don't know. I think these consoles launched as between 1080p and 4K dynamic res 60 hertz consoles, and they're kind of still there with the occasional game popping up now with the lower input resolution. But what's better? I mean, like, if I look right now, the Series X renewed on Amazon is below 450. Or a new one is 490. I mean, even now, comparing the Series X to, what would be the compare? I guess you would compare it to a 7800 XT. That's one graphics card versus a whole console, and you're looking at something that's probably 80% stronger, but it's just the graphics card. I don't know that the consoles look that bad now, although I guess it does beg the question, should they do price drops eventually? Because I don't really expect them to.
Well, no, I'm saying this is the point in the gen where it starts reversing as like...
It's not as much of a killer deal. It does not to say it's a bad deal.
But I do also think that 2020, the year the consoles came out, was kind of the point where 1080p was really saturated as a resolution. And if these continue to be, they advertised them more as 4K consoles, but that always felt a bit dubious. If these remain 1080p to 1440p consoles, I think that's keeping in line with their hardware. Like 2020 is when PC hardware really, I think, got saturated at 1080p, and they both chose GPU options that were certainly not low end at the time.
I guess the final thing I could think of to bring up regarding this story before we move on is just, I mean, is it a good idea now that you see this, you think, for there to be mid-gen refreshes from these people? Because I'm not sure if there will be an Xbox One. I know they both designed mid-gen refreshes. It seems likely PlayStation is something coming 2 to 3 times stronger. Like, do you think that? I think me and you haven't really wanted mid-gen refreshes. Do you think this makes you feel like it's a little more warranted?
I mean, not really. It's still running. It's still running the newest, best-looking game at, I believe, above 1080p in the quality mode. Obviously, it would be better if that quality mode were 60 FPS instead of 30. But that's what we have.
Yeah, and I'm just looking at the performance on PC because we mostly talked about console here and console relative to PC, but I'm not really seeing any performance that seems out of line with everything. All these graphics cards pretty much, plus minus 10% seem to be, I'm looking on Tech Power up here, in the order you'd kind of expect them to be. In ray tracing, Lovelace wins a bit more than you might expect, but I mean, Nvidia is better at ray tracing now, so I can't really say it's that unexpected here. And it's interesting, in 4K with ray tracing turned on, you'll definitely want to use DLSS. I guess that's the other thing too, is I did read that DLSS 3.5, a few outlets reported that it does not seem really done. Like, it over sharpens things, and it's really not perfect. And if this is the DLSS 3.5 showcase game, besides Cyberpunk, it still feels like it's going to be another half a year to a year before 3.5 is this thing Nvidia can say is clearly better than 3 was. Although, I mean, I'm sure they'll get there. They always seem to lately.
Yeah, I agree. I don't know. It is funny looking at this game's performance. This is kind of the performance you would get out of like the newest game that leveraged hardware the most. Remember when games came out and you just couldn't max out a game on any graphics card, really? And that's kind of where we're at with this game. Like, you can max it out in 1080p with ray tracing on the 7900 XTX, and you're not getting 100 FPS on it. And that's what the most demanding games used to do, and it's not necessarily a bad thing. Like, that game will age into newer graphics cards, and it will be a big benchmarking thing and it will be really impressive that when the first card can play it at 120 FPS or something.
Well, just remember, if you have, a 4070 Ti or something, you can turn on DLSS balanced. You can turn things from ultra to high settings, and you can probably still get it above 100 hertz at high resolutions. It's just, if you want to go for eye candy, this is a game that actually allows you to do something that makes better eye candy with the performance. And it's not like it's a super fast-paced game. So if there was a game to push it, this would be one of them where if I was in the decision room, I'd go, yeah, it would make sense. I think a lot of people won't mind playing this at 60 frames.
Oh yeah, 60 frames per second. I mean, if the gameplay is anything like the first Alan Wake, this isn't a game that necessitates 120 FPS.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, let us then move on to story number 2. Apple M3 SoCs unveiled. Quoting here from AntiLag with a little bit of modifications to it by me. Capping off a busy month of new processor announcements, Apple this week has announced a new generation of M-series Apple Silicon, and with it, a newly refreshed generation of MacBook Pros. Anchored by the new M3 series of processors, Apple has opted to launch most of the stack in a single go, announcing products based on the vanilla M3 and the more powerful M3 Pro and Max SoCs at the same time. With their latest generation of high-performance silicon for Macs and undoubtedly probably high-end iPads, Apple is seemingly taking full advantage of the density and power improvements offered by TSMC's N3B process. But at the same time, they are also changing how their SoCs are configured. The M3 Pro in particular is a significant departure from its predecessor. So although the M3 chips do not in and of themselves rise to the level of groundbreaking, there are some important changes here that we'll be taking a look at. In summary, the M3 Max, the strongest monolithic chip out of these 3 launching, has 12 big, 4 little cores, and 40 GPU cores, and supports up to 128 gigabytes of memory and 5 displays. The M3 Pro has 6 big, 6 little cores, 18 core GPU, supports 36 gigabytes of memory at most, and has 3 display outputs. And then the M3 Basic has 4 big, 4 little cores, 10 core GPU, and supports 24 gigabytes of memory and 2 displays. They have 92, 37, and 25 billion transistors, respectively. And Apple is also starting smaller in terms of volume. The company is using these new chips for updates to the MacBook Pro lineup and on iMac, some of the company's most expensive and widely thought to be lower volume products. This is in contrast to starting with a MacBook Air and other cheaper alternatives with high volume, which consume a much larger volume from the entry-level chip. So, yeah, I mean, I'll get to that in a second, but just to round out this write-up, the performance is a mixed bag and impressiveness, though. Early numbers put the M3 Max close to an M2 Ultra, which is impressive because remember, the M2 Ultra was 2 of their strongest chips put together. So that's quite an improvement in performance, and the M3 Ultra will certainly be a complete beast. But then the M3 Pro on paper could be viewed as inferior to the M2 Pro. I mean, I'm sure it won't be, or they wouldn't have called it that. But it is notable that it has a 12-core CPU, 6 big and 6 little, whereas the M2 Pro had 8 big and 4 little. And the memory bandwidth of the M2 Pro and M1 Pro is rated up to 200 gigabytes per second, whereas this one only has up to 150 gigabytes per second. So I guess we'll see how this turns out on paper, but I wouldn't accept a massive increase in performance over the old Pro. And then the M3 seems mostly like an updated version of the M2. It's 25% more transistors, same core counts to my memory, and of course, now supports mesh shaders and ray tracing as well. But otherwise, the specs seem fairly similar. And I also link, I believe in the description, to a TechSpot article that noted how it's kind of crazy Apple is taping out and then launching 3 entirely different chips at the same time. That's a level of money they're funneling into a launch that almost no company can compete with, and they're doing it from a dominant position. So I think that's really the biggest thing people are pointing out is, wow, they're actually launching all 3 at once. Like, that's something most companies can't even afford to do, but they're doing it.
Oh yeah, I mean, I guess that means maybe their tech and development process is becoming more efficient, that they can release all of them at the same time. Whereas, but with the M1, it felt like I feel like these all came out these variants came out across 6 months or something like that, and the Ultra wasn't out until a year later or something. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I mean, that's a big departure. I would say this is the first time Apple SoC launch for their desktop and laptops where I'm a bit more skeptical on what their performance numbers will actually look like when all is said and done, because this is the first time where they've actually had a reversal in some of their or a seeming reversal in some of their specs versus their predecessors. So like that, I'm curious if the M3 Pro, for example, is really going to be that big of an increase versus their M2 Pro, or if it's just they needed to get something out to replace their old system, their old hardware, and it's only going to be 5 or 10% better.
Yeah, because they openly say that there's going to be low volume at first. It really does feel like what they're doing is they're like, the fastest one's really fast. You're going to want that in your laptop. The other 2 are kind of just better versions of the old ones. And if there's not a lot of volume at first, whatever, buy the old one.
Yeah, which that might be a strategy that works, I suppose.
It does beg the question if they have any yield issues here, or why otherwise why would they be doing it this way? I don't know.
Yeah, it's a bit strange. I mean, I think it's been as far as Apple has been for the past 3 or 4 years, I would say this year has been one of the lesser years for their hardware mm-hmm. as far as they usually are, because I think Apple, since they've moved their CPUs in-house, have been consistently pretty impressive, and this is the first time where it looks like
this one might be a little years, or the past year and a half, it's been starting to feel, it's been starting to feel like it's getting less impressive every time for over a year now, though, hasn't it?
Oh yeah, I would agree. I mean, I think we said that initially when the M1 came out, this thing didn't just appear out of nowhere. This is the first time they're telling us about they're publicly unveiling these SoCs that they've been developing for probably years. and subsequent releases are probably going to be more in line with, what you expect from other companies' hardware. And yeah, that's exactly what's happening.
Mm-hmm. I don't know that I really have anything else to say about this. Before I can really give any firm "this is bad" or good" statements, I need to see the benchmarks from a bunch of people, because you could see a situation where the M3 base, what if it ends up being 30% stronger than its predecessor while consuming less, like half the energy? I don't think that's what's going to happen, but if it did, that'd be impressive. Then again, we've also seen recent releases out of Apple where it doesn't really seem stronger than the previous gen and may even be less efficient. So outside of obviously seeing that the M3 Ultra and the M3 Max is impressive, I can't really come to a conclusion about the other things, because these are notebook chips. So until we see how efficient they are in the real world, it's still a bit of waiting and seeing.
Yeah, I mean, the one thing I'd say to that is, like, I do think Apple has, even if the numbers they put out in their press releases are usually relatively vague, they've yet to be misleading. So I suppose that's the positive with them, is I suspect they'll be mostly in line with, their graphs that they show that are incredibly vague, and it's like, okay, yeah. This is
they're vague, but they typically tell the truth. Whereas with Nvidia, you would go, for example, 2 to 4 times the performance. Not really, guys. Come on.
No, it's 2 times performance, and then you just put a frame rate doubler thing in there so you can claim 4 times performance.
Mm-hmm. Well, let us then move on to story number 3. This piece of content is brought to you by AliExpress. AliExpress is a feather everyone should have in their online shopping cap for finding competitive pricing on clothing, electronics, and do-it-yourself computer parts, like this brand new RTX 4060 Ventus 2X 8GB overclock. This is a card that really does well as an inclusion in a budget system, or perhaps a backup card for a creator like me, who doesn't want any backup card to suck a ton of energy while they're going through a stressful situation, or require you to rebuild your entire case to fit it into it. That's not what you want to have to deal with if you have a backup card. You just want it to do what it needs to do and do it well enough without sucking a ton of energy. And you also don't want to pay too much for it, though, because it's a backup card. And that's why AliExpress is a good tool to have in your tool set for checking prices. If you just go to one online retailer, then you could be missing out on far better deals on products than you really need to. You should check out AliExpress. And the RTX 4060 does work if it's priced right. It doesn't bring any new levels of performance per se, but it does bring a solid experience with lower power usage than previous generations. And if you want it, you can use the offer codes on screen and the links in the description to support Moore's Law is Dead while you're doing your November or Black Friday or really any holiday shopping this year. Using these codes and links helps the channel a ton, and it's a really great way to show support for the team members of Moore's Law is Dead while you get something hopefully for a lower price than you realized you could have somewhere else. Again, clicking on the links in the description and using the offer codes on screen helps the channel a ton, and it of course also helps you save extra money this Black Friday season. Check out AliExpress today. AMD's 2024 through 2025 APU roadmap gets leaked by Moore's Law is Dead. According to a fresh new leak of an AMD roadmap by yours truly, the following updates must be reported for AMD's upcoming APU releases. First of all, Strix Point is now expected to firmly launch in quarter 3 of 2024. And yeah, I mean, that's still mid-2024. We had already heard that Strix Point was supposed to launch by the middle of 2024. But there was some hope that they could launch it by early quarter 2 or something. And this pretty much puts to rest the idea that this will be an early 2024 release. It's really more going to be like a late summer release. Second, Strix Halo and Fire Range, including the X3D variants of Fire Range, which is distinctly called out on the roadmap, have been moved back to 2025, unfortunately. And thirdly, Kraken and Escher have also been detailed as releasing in 2025 as well. Getting specific, Kraken is now exclusively leaked by this video to have 8 Zen 5 cores and utilize RDNA 3.5 within a product that is positioned as being on the lower end of the premium category from AMD, succeeding Hawk Point, which is arguably the successor to like Phoenix and Rembrandt R, and Escher as listed as having 8 Zen 4 cores yet again, with RDNA 3, not 3.5, and is being positioned to succeed Rembrandt R in the upper end of the mainstream category. Also, don't worry, Hawkpoint, an enhanced version of Phoenix, is still positioned to launch to premium devices in early 2024. But this is actually where things go from a bit of a negative turn to a positive one. Hawkpoint isn't expected to be a full rework of Phoenix, but it does claim on this roadmap to offer 60% higher AI engine performance over Phoenix, namely 16 tops per second in Int 8 compared to Phoenix's 10 tops per second in Int 8. This is almost certainly achieved through massively higher AI engine clocks, and that then therefore might point to higher clocks in the rest of the SoC as well, but that seems to be the most of the change. This puts to rest both the notion that Hawkpoint would be a fully new redesign with RDNA 3.5, and also puts to rest the notion that it's a very, very weak increase. This seems like a uplift that's not as big as Renoir to Cezanne, of course, but seems to be a bit better than what we saw from Rembrandt to Rembrandt Refresh. Furthermore, now Halo, Strix Point, and Kraken are listed as having 45 to 50 tops, which is far higher than the 40 to 20 tops previously planned by AMD and leaked roadmaps and documents. You see, Strix Halo was detailed to have 40 tops, Strix Point 20 tops. Now, basically, every Zen 5 APU in 2025 just says 45 to 50 tops. Why the uplift? Supposedly Microsoft. According to this channel's sources, Microsoft is putting in place a 45 to 50 tops requirement for some form of Windows 11 AI certification. Maybe it's for ideal Copilot performance, which is launching right now. And then Kepler on Twitter also suggested that this could be a requirement for Windows 12, that you'll need a 50 tops SoC to be Windows 12 certified. And so there you go. With this leak, we can conclude that Intel's Meteor Lake should, because of the delays, have a solid 1 to 3 months in the sun as a premium product. But it does also seem like that the cheaper to manufacture Hawkpoint is going to be a bit stronger than we thought it might be, that AMD still has a mobility lineup ready for the 2024 back-to-school season, while Intel likely will have large competitive gaps in mobility until 2026. All right, this was actually pretty big leak out of this channel, I thought, out of left field. What'd you think, Dan?
I mean, I don't think it overall changes the calculus of where Intel is versus AMD in the long run. Obviously, Strix coming out earlier in the year would have been better, and Hawkpoint doesn't seem to be that big of an improvement, although an appreciable improvement, at least, especially with AI over what we have with Phoenix. But they'll have a gap architect, or they'll have a gap chip to put into new laptops for, I don't know, 6 to 9 months with Hawkpoint. And then hopefully we'll start seeing Strix Point actually enter laptops later this year, which is, around what you were saying, even if it would have been more ideal if it came out in like June or July or something. Or not June, if it came out in like late May or late June. And then, to my memory, though, this is decently later than Strix Halo was expected to come out, or am I just misremembering?
No, and I did say that in the video as well, that Strix Point, I think early stuff I had, the document, that initial Strix Halo leak, it said first half of 2024, but then I even said in the video, my contacts say it's getting pushed back to the middle. And so it's going from like Q23 to Q3. That's not real. That's arguably not even a delay, right? For Strix Point. I would say it is a bit of one, though. Just like Meteor Lake launching in December, I would say is a delay, even though it's still coming out in Q4. Definitely was not planned to come out that late in Q4. Same for Strix Point. But Strix Halo, yeah, I mean, at first they wanted to get it out, I believe, middle or early 2024. And then the initial leak, I said, sounds like it might be second half of the year. Now it just says 2025. That's clearly 1 to 2 quarters, maybe even 3 delayed from what they wanted.
Which, yeah, I mean, if they had like Strix Point coming out against, or Strix Halo, sorry, coming out against, or even before Arrow Lake, that would have been huge. And I think that could have been like AMD actually taking a significant amount of market share, because I think Strix Point is more in line with like what they've been putting out for the past few generations. It's clearly a departure and clearly going to be a lot stronger than what they've gotten in the past, but not a huge departure. And I think it's going to be more able to, actually just be an APU that is dedicated for gaming hardware without a dedicated GPU. But Strix Halo really, I think, has a chance to completely change the market if they get it into enough product.
Right. The only thing that I worry about now is, at least the documents I had suggested Strix Halo should match the performance of 4070 laptop chips, which really means matching 4060 Ti performance, but of course using significantly less energy for the overall SoC than the competition and taking up less space. Has all these benefits of using one APU over having a dedicated card next to an SoC. But I guess we can assume maybe it's going to end up a bit stronger than like we're seeing an increase in AI performance. Who's to say that this coming out later doesn't mean that it's now going to be closer to a 4080 laptop in performance, or at least a Max-Q variant of that? But I don't know, 2025, it might just be launching next to Blackwell. I wouldn't expect mobile Blackwell to be ready until back to school 2025, really, or at best to be ready like mid 2025 in a lot of laptops. But that is a competitive. I always felt like Halo will be at its best if it can launch at least half a year before Blackwell, because then you'll have these reviews where it's just clearly competing with high-end laptops and it's an APU. Now everyone's going to be saying, well, it's more efficient, but Blackwell's is launching right now. So it's not like you can really compare it to the 4070. Now you've got to compare it to like the 5060 laptop edition or something, which is a competitive. It's not as ideal as it could have been for AMD.
I mean, yeah, if it were coming out where where Lovelace was still the main cards being sold in laptops, like, oh yeah, I mean, yeah, you could advertise this APU, which is more power efficient, is essentially a mid-range graphics card for laptop. And now if it's coming out next to Blackwell, it's going to be more of a low-end graphics card. Still more power efficient. I honestly still think an ideal solution for most people, like, I don't particularly need high-end graphics performance in a laptop. So I think for someone like me, this would be good, but it's not nearly as marketable if it's coming out next to Blackwell.
Yeah, I guess the final things I want to talk about here, though, about this is I kind of have some theories about what may be going on, right? So what I've had suggested to me by a few people right now is that, well, actually, I'll put it this way. One source said it to me this way, who knows about this, but isn't someone at AMD. This person said, well, if you look at Phoenix, you have 10 tops. If you look at Hawkpoint, you have 16. If there's a 50 tops requirement for anything, why not just, like, 16 is a huge change. Why not just make it 50? Like, why would it go to 16 unless they just found a way to get there through clock speeds? And that's why I think that's what's going on with Hawkpoint, is it has higher clock speeds, because 16 is such a weird number. If it was like 20, I would say they changed more, but I kind of doubt it. And what I've also had suggested to me is that for Windows 11, Microsoft might allow you, maybe even Windows 12, Microsoft might allow you to combine the TOPS performance of the GPU and the AI engine. So I believe the GPU in Phoenix is capable of about 35 tops or something. I've heard from somebody. Sorry if I get this wrong, people listening, but what I've heard is if they push the clocks that much on the AI engine, it gets them over the requirement barrier. And that's probably why they pushed it so hard. Meanwhile, the more I think about it, when I see them go from 40 tops with Strix Halo and 20 tops with Strix Point to all of a sudden all Zen 5 APUs have 45 to 50 tops, and there's some delays, I kind of wonder if what's going on here is they overclocked the IP block for the AI engine in Halo, and then instead of putting the weaker one in these other products, they just said, nope, everything gets this. Yeah, everything gets the Strix Halo IP block, but now we're going to have to delay everything at least a quarter to make it work or something. Because going from 40 to 45 to 50 with Halo, it's probably basically the same thing. Going from 20 to 50, they just fundamentally did a last minute change on the design, and that probably caused some delays.
I mean, that makes sense. And it definitely speaks to something is changing that forced them to push that AI engine, like you and
exactly
Kepler suggested, which also really speaks to if this is a result of Microsoft updating, going to some new standard with Windows 11, or just ditching Windows 11 and going to Windows 12 already. It really speaks to how big of a failure Windows 11 has been thus far.
Yeah, I guess. And, I'm sure Windows moving to 12 will just make people go, well, it's a new number, so I'll give it a try now. But if we're being honest, all of this seems like all of 11 and 12 could have both been just updates to 10. I can't help but feel that.
I know. I feel like Windows 10 really nailed the UI of Windows finally. And I don't know why they're trying to make massive changes to it. I mean, I guess the answer is they want you to buy a new key, but it's still pretty obnoxious. And yeah, I wish it was just still Windows 10 and they didn't make the weird decisions they did. Although I do have a Windows 12 laptop now. I mean, not 12.
11.
Windows 11 laptop now. And I don't have complaints about Windows 11. It's not like they're murdering your child to give you Windows 11 or something.
I'd say the most annoying thing about Windows 11, which of course I have on my benchmarking system, my girlfriend's PC uses it as well. I built PCs for other people that use it, so I've used it, is it still just feels so bizarre to me that Microsoft has half of the options in their menus, the old, like, basically Windows 7, like they have like a slick Windows 10/11 interface, and still half of the things you click on pull up like a Windows 7 era looking thing. And I would think, I get why that happens in 10, but if you're going to call this Windows 11, at a minimum, shouldn't I have expected you to solve all of that and make it one uniformed interface by now?
Yeah, I
and now you're moving to 12, and I'm still pulling up like some stuff that almost looks like Windows XP. Like, put this in the new UI. Like, what is going on? It's bizarre.
Yeah, I mean, if it means fewer things, well, I think they mostly solve that with updates or something. It looks less like these social media or new websites where everything has to be curvy for some reason that I was expecting, which I'm happy with. Because I really hate that decision that so many internet companies have, websites have made, where it's like everything needs to, like, I don't know, look bouncy for some reason.
Run Again writes in, hope I said that right, and says, "Hey, Tom and Dan, first time asking a question. Well, welcome. With the new release of AMD's mobile APU line with 12 graphics CUs, that's the 680M and then 780M, I was expecting to see a segment of budget gaming laptops crop up around them. I've seen budget mini PCs leverage them, to be fair, but the laptops I've seen are all $1,000 plus and sometimes have a discrete GPU anyways. I was wondering what y'all think about it. Maybe the fact that the CPU itself is high end. Well, number one, if you put a Nvidia graphics card sticker on a laptop, it does make it so well. All OEMs tell me that, like, if you have two laptops and one of them costs 10% more, but you can say it comes with an Nvidia graphics card, people are going to pay the extra 10%. So they tend to do it,
Yeah, and like, if you're buying an expensive premium CPU, which these APUs are premium CPU, do have premium CPUs in them, would you rather put that in a product that sells for $600 to $800 or $1,400 to $2,000? I think you're probably going to pick the latter option most of the time. Like, and we've talked about that a bunch on this channel. I wish there were more gaming laptops like that too, but that's just not what the market wants.
Well, and to be fair, we've talked about this. The Lenovo laptop I got you as like a graduation gift. I thought, you wanted a Phoenix laptop. You wanted a laptop without a dedicated card, but I managed to get this like Lenovo 90 hertz, like 1600p touch screen laptop with a Phoenix 8 core for $1,000 flat. And then it had a 3050 6 gigabyte in it. And I went, I know you didn't want a dedicated card, Dan, but I'm pretty sure you could just turn it off because weirdly enough, this is the same price as other things. Now, since I got you that laptop, the price has gone up. I honestly suspect that Lenovo updated the specs, forgot to update the price, and we got lucky because it's not the same price anymore. So to be fair, I think you got lucky, but it's a premium price. How much does it cost to add the 3050? Did they already design it for a 3050? Probably. So I think they figure, well, we might as well spend $100 on the GPU if it makes people pay $1,200 instead of $1,000.
Yeah, and like I definitely agree with Ronigan. I wish there were products like that out on the market, but that's just OEMs don't want it, and consumers especially with laptops, still have a lot of brand loyalty, I think, with Nvidia. So more people are going to buy a laptop that has Nvidia on it than an AMD APU.
Well, I think we cannot. I feel like this is something I have to remind everybody about with relatively often. Intel has a ton of oversupply of Alder Lake and now Raptor Lake. Like from what I've heard, they just stuffed the channels, and OEMs are just trying to get rid of this stuff. You see Intel in more budget laptops because they're trying to get rid of Intel CPUs, and it's hard for them to keep AMD laptops in stock. They sell very well. And so if you're an OEM and you're like, we have unlimited Intel CPUs on the one hand over here that Intel's giving us a discount for, by the way, at this point. And over here, we have AMD CPUs that we can't keep in stock. Well, we can't keep them in stock. We might as well put them in premium laptops. And until AMD gets to a point where they have I think they're at 30 something percent now, until they get to 50% of the laptop market and have extra volume, they're not likely to be in a ton of budget products because they can't keep them in stock. So you might as well charge more for it. It's a good problem to have if you're AMD, but it is still a problem I'm sure AMD wishes they didn't have.
Oh yeah, I mean, if they're making more money, that's great for them. It's just, I do feel like the products it's going into is kind of antithetical to the design philosophy of their APUs, though.
Yeah. Well, and might I suggest to run again here, I think Hawkpoint you'll probably see in more budget stuff as they relegate a streamlined version of Phoenix with some upgrades to where you see Rembrandt now, right? Rembrandt refresh. No, you see that in budget stuff all the time now, sometimes by itself. Not always, but sometimes.
Yeah, that's true.
I think we kind of just have to accept that AMD's strategy moving forward is they make one type of APU, it's out for a while, then they have the refresh get relegated to the budget stuff where it's by itself. And until Hawkpoint's out, Phoenix is more premium, and until we get to not Kraken, but whatever the successor to Strix Point is, it's going to be the same situation. The Hollow Knight writes in, and he says, if Strix Halo uses the same CCDs as Fire Range, will there be Strix Halo products with Vcache? Well, I would say either way, AMD can make Strix Halo with Vcache if they wanted to, or if they want to. I don't... even if it used its own unified 16-core CCD, which is some evidence that might be what's going on either way, they can put Vcache on it if they really want to. It's just so far, I haven't really seen indications that's happening. And if I'm being entirely honest, I feel like by now I would have seen on one piece of documentation Vcache option or plus X3D, but I really haven't seen that. So I would suggest either Strix Halo is meant to use some unique tile, or they just don't want to launch X3D, or, it's entirely conceivable. It's its own Zen 5 plus Zen 5C 16-core, CPU tile. It's entirely conceivable. That's what's going on. I'd suggest that'd be a little wasteful if they did it that way, but I just don't think they really want to do that right now. But if they did, I mean, I think that would make it the most efficient APU ever. So I certainly hope they will.
Yeah, I mean, I think it would be ideal for it, but we'll see. I mean, who knows? Maybe it'll come out 6 months later so they can have some minor press release, as what often seems to happen with VK.
Not to mention, I mean, we don't know enough about Zen 5 from benchmarks to know how much it benefits it in what ways. So far, sure. Zen 3 with Vcache, certainly Zen 4 even more so actually with Vcache, seems to have this big power consumption drop. But we don't know how much that'll help with Zen 5. Most evidence would be it should help more, but until we see what Zen 5 in real benchmarks actually does, it's hard to say if they really need that or how much it would benefit it. Because again, this is quite different from another situation where if you have Vcache on an SoC that gets paired with a 4090 laptop graphics card, yeah, the extra Vcache is good. That graphics card could use almost as much CPU performance as you can spare. But this was only ever going to be paired with 40 compute unit, mid-range to high-end stuff. I don't know if you need any more CPU performance, right?
Yeah, that's true.
In fact, I might argue the biggest use for that would be as a selling point for a mobile Threadripper for specific workloads, because it has a 256-bit memory controller that can support hundreds of gigabytes of RAM. I'd almost think that would be for professional uses the real reason you'd want that. Because I don't think the 40 compute unit graphics cards going to be bottlenecked by 16 Zen 5 cores with or without Vcache, guys. Compressor Earthblocks writes in and he says, Tom, what is the next Mendocino? Currently it uses Zen 2, but that cannot last forever. Can it? Will Zen 4 replace Zen 2 in Mendocino next, whenever that comes out? I would assume that's what they would do, because Zen 4 really is analogous to Zen 2 in that, yes, Zen 5 will be better, but Zen 4 and Zen 2's core size is actually really small. So for a budget chip, it would make sense to keep using Zen 4 and these tiny APUs. Having said that, it says they're going to be using Mendocino through 2025 on the roadmap I have. And I know the successor, what was it? I was told it's called Sonoma Valley. And I believe that's come out in other leaks a long time ago as well. And I still haven't seen anything say Sonoma Valley on a document that is at least 2 years old. So I think there's a chance AMD doesn't think they need Mendocino as a segment. And they would be better off just selling Rembrandt, frankly, down there or something than putting all this money into taping out some other ultra low power design, which is very different than Intel, which we're about to get to, who thinks Lunar Lake should be like a distinct premium low power thing. I think AMD is running the numbers, and at least their perspective compared to Intel is the amount of people that will pay extra for a weak efficient CPU is fairly small. So we might as well just clock Rembrandt lower and sell it in the cheap ones. like what's the point of making this special thing, you know?
Yeah, I mean, the one thing, at a certain point, it starts to become a stupid business decision to keep putting Zen 2 6 nanometer into their things, though, right? Or
maybe, I don't know. I think that thing is, what is it, like an 80 millimeter square die? It costs like nothing. So yeah, I don't know. Like, but yeah, I think it does. And that's why they would go, well, yeah, but so whatever our budget chip will be, it'll be the rejects of stuff we made too much of. Like, maybe we'll have a bunch of leftover Rembrandt, and then, or we plan to do that. We don't have a bunch of leftover Rembrandt, but then we have leftover Little Phoenix. Whatever, we'll just disable that into cheap laptops or something to get rid of it. And I wonder if that's what AMD's concluding. If we're going to be making, you know, I guess maybe not Fire Range, because that's pretty much just a mobile version of the desktop chip. But if we're going to be making Halo, Strix Point, Kraken, and Escher, and we're still going to have Rembrandt down there, is there a chance one of them will be oversupplied and we could just use that or something? I don't know. I think that's probably what they're thinking from what I can tell, because we still don't see Sonoma Valley. So I almost wonder if that segment's gone for the foreseeable future. What is for the foreseeable future? It's at least through 2025. I would say that qualifies as foreseeable future. But speaking of releases both in and after the foreseeable future, let us get to story number 4. Meteor Lake performance detailed, and Nova Lake big last level cache release date also leaked. On Friday night, this channel put out a leak that aimed to firm up some details regarding upcoming Intel launches in response to recent AMD leaks. In summary, every chip has an efficiency sweet spot, a sweet spot where it reaches its best performance per power ratio before there are large diminishing returns. According to my contacts, Meteor Lakes, at least in the testing that the people who have the chips right now have seen, really has an efficiency sweet spot at 65 to 95 watts. Now, I have to be clear, that doesn't mean if you limit it to 45 watts, it won't be technically more efficient than 65 to 95. But the curve in efficiency isn't such that it's drastically better, right? If that makes sense. And at this power consumption level, though, it seems to perform like a Raptor Lake chip that consumes around 95 to 140 watts. So if you think about it, let's just split the difference here. It's like if you have a 120 watt Raptor Lake chip and an 80 watt Meteor Lake chip, they seem to be performing about the same. In other words, Meteor Lake really doesn't seem like it's doubling Raptor Lake efficiency. And you can actually see in recent marketing that Intel is suddenly comparing Meteor Lake's efficiency to doubling Alder Lake, which, by the way, by the time this comes out, will be 2 to 3 generations old by Meteor Lake's launch. This is in stark contrast to AMD, which consistently targets their laptop chips to have efficiency sweet spots between 28 to 54 watts, and thus suggests that Meteor Lake may lose in some efficiency categories, at least not win by much, compared to Hawkpoint and certainly compared to Strix Point. Idle power consumption and casual workloads are probably where Meteor Lake shines, but outside of that, you push the cores hard or even somewhat hard, it's kind of up in the air if it's actually that much more efficient than what AMD will have at the time. Additionally, in this video, we leaked that Arrow Lake will still be a very late 2024 product, contrary to, I personally believe, how Pat Gelsinger was painting it. What did he say? He said, like, Arrow Lake on 20A is on and working well in Windows, which kind of makes it sound like it's almost ready. I have to point out, and I did in this video, Meteor Lake powered on, I think, early or mid 2021, and it's still not out. So from what I am told, Arrow Lake powered on in Q2, and thus, if it were to release a year and a half after that, that's an improvement over what they did, relatively speaking, to Meteor Lake. So no. Arrow Lake is definitely a late 2024 product. Additionally, Lunar Lake is expected to launch 1 to 6 months after that, so probably the first half of 2025. Best case scenario, they pull it to December of next year. And Panther Lake is an end of 2025 product, probably launching next to Arrow Lake Refresh in a very similar way to how Meteor Lake is launching next to a Raptor Lake Refresh. And then finally in the video, Nova Lake is set to launch late 2026, which, if we're being honest, seems to be the first full new desktop performance architecture after Arrow Lake. That's not coming until 2026. And the big LLC version, last level cache version, which I asked is definitely a direct Vcache competitor. Apparently that version of Nova Lake isn't even launching until 2027, which at that point I would argue it's a Zen 7, Zen 8, or even Zen successor competitor. All of this forces us to beg a question. Can Intel survive until then? Based on what we can see in their recent earnings, client is their last bastion of profitable income. If everybody here looks it up, you will see that client is now almost twice as big as data center, if not literally almost exactly twice as big, actually. And everything else is much smaller segments in terms of like quarterly revenue. I don't know. It just seems worrisome that we see AMD climbing to about 50% market share while making decent margins. Well, Intel, if they get to 50% market share and they're making no margins, I'm just worried AMD can do to Intel what Nvidia did to Radeon. And this is all happening. That's data center where Intel is not making money on each chip sold and almost going to be a 50-50 market. In client, I mean, yeah, they still have a huge client footprint, but Qualcomm, Apple, and AMD are about to go harder here than we've ever seen before. So I don't know. Again, like I said before, Meteor Lake will have time to shine for at least a few months, but I really do have reservations about how well Intel can survive till 2027. I mean, that's the first time they're going to have a Vcache competitor. I don't know, Dan, what do you think about all of this?
It doesn't sound good. I mean, I don't know. It's sometimes feels depressing talking about Intel because it just seems like there is a constant feeling that they're about to catch up, and then 3 months later you learn more about what's happening with their product development, and oh no, this isn't going to be the company's saving grace, because everything they release comes out like 3 to 6 months later than it should, or more, really, I guess. But it's just kind of depressing at a certain point. Like Meteor Lake, I suppose, is beating an AMD competitor to the market, but I don't know how impressive Meteor Lake is going to really be at this point. Like, if the ideal performance is 65 to 95 watts, that's not that great for laptop, in my opinion. I mean, that'll be good.
They're still going to put it in a lot of 28 and 45 watt.
I'm aware that there's going to be low powered variants of it, but if it's not scaling well in performance at those low levels, we'll see. I mean, depending on how poorly it scales, that's not going to be a compelling argument against Hawk Point or even Phoenix, like what they have right now. And I suppose at 95 watts, that can go in like a desktop replacement maybe, but that's not that. At least I don't think that's that big.
Well, it'd be smaller than desktop replacement. Remember, we have 14-inch laptops that have a 65 watt CPU or something, and a 65 watt. So no, I think it'll fit in thin and lights just because it's by itself, right? But not new form factors unless you compromise on performance a little bit.
Yeah, so I don't know, that 65 to 95. I mean, you want a power band from like 20 to 140 watts or something. That would be the holy grail for a CPU. But I don't know.
And you always have to decide where are we going to target it. It seems weird that it's around there, intentional or not, is what I would say.
At least the way Meteor Lake has been discussed in the past, or how they, to me, it sounded like it would have been ideal. Its ideal power band would be somewhere between like, I don't know, 40 and 65 watts or something like that. And
I would have thought 15 to 30. I don't know.
And yeah, I mean, this is I mean, it came off like this is a decent low to mid power CPU architecture. And 65 to 95 watts is more medium to high power consumption by normal standards. I guess Intel has pushed their architectures to absurd levels now with like Raptor Lake refresh. But yeah, I don't know. This just doesn't seem that great to me anymore. Hopefully it still scales in efficiency well below 30 watts, and
I imagine it's
ideal
not
power
bad.
band won't be terrible. But yeah, I don't know. It just doesn't seem like it's going to be that great of a competitor towards Hawkpoint at this point. And
put another way, it seems like despite the delays, Hawkpoint might be a perfectly acceptable competitor to Meteor Lake.
Yeah, that's a better way to put it. And if Strix is only like a few months around the corner, it's probably just worth waiting for. Like, we'll see how fast Intel gets Meteor Lake actually into laptops, and how much of a paper launch this is. Because once again, I've said that before. I feel like laptop CPUs and GPUs are really, really prone to paper launches, where you don't really start seeing the things that quote unquote launched in actual products until like 3 to 6 months later.
Well, and I want to touch on that too, because I asked around, like when I got this information, the AMD roadmap, APU stuff, like, okay, well, Q3 for Strix Point, is it at least going to be a good launch, or is it going to be this thing where they're like, it launches in, late July, and then you can't buy it till November or something stupid? And what I was told is, well, you can never promise ahead of time how many OEMs will really end up using it, right? Like right away. Eventually they all probably will, but we can't make them all rush it out at the right time. But the volume should be there. And someone actually quite literally said to me, AMD's tired of launching products de facto in the no man's land. Like, you announce in Q1, but then it's not decently available until summer. Well, what's the point? People don't buy as many laptops in the summer. They usually either buy it at the very beginning of the year, or especially through back to school and holiday seasons. So I think there's a decent chance here, though, that AMD will have decent availability for back to school. And if they can afford to wait and they think they can, then they should, which actually kind of gets me to my other thought here. We have to remember that, like, AMD, especially Nvidia in my experience, by the way, and Intel too, tend to know what each other are working on before I leak it. Like, they tend to. And like, they have people whose jobs are to figure this out. And so if AMD was sitting there and they're like, hey, from what we're hearing, Meteor Lake really won't even be ready until the beginning of 2024. And now we hear about this Windows requirement. Maybe AMD said, we don't need Strix Point sooner. Like, and it'd be better to make it more positioned to do well in AI performance, because I have to say this too, we still don't know the performance of the Meteor Lake neural engine. We only know that Intel keeps talking about it without giving that many firm numbers. But I've seen some suggestions, and again, this isn't me saying I'm sure of this, but I've heard suggestions from some people by now, at least in some discussion boards, that it kind of seems like Intel's telegraphing that Meteor Lake has between 12 and 15 tops, which, if that's true, Hawkpoint might actually have the better neural engine.
Yeah, and the next
if that happens, that was one of the main selling points of Meteor Lake.
Yeah, that's true. And then the next thing is, we'll see. Maybe Intel will come out with Arrow Lake's neural engine and it will be fine as well. But then there's the fact that if Microsoft is going to put out a new version of Windows, well, that is going to need to light a fire under Intel's ass to make sure that their neural engines are up to snuff to actually run Windows 11 whatever or Windows 12. I don't know what the delineation would be with Windows 11 that requires you said 40 tops, right? And
I've heard 45 to 50. It's so weird people say that. I've had one person tell me what the requirement might be is 45 if it's just the neural engine, 50 if you combine things.
Oh, okay. So that might light a fire under Intel's ass Arrow Lake needs to support that new version of Windows if they're going to be launching around when that new version of Windows launches. Or else I think that would be a very embarrassing launch for Arrow Lake.
Mm-hmm. If we think about the performance per watt curves that we've seen comparing at least Dragon Range to Raptor Lake and, seemingly comparing Phoenix to Raptor Lake, the mobile focused 6+8 Raptor Lake SoCs and so on and so forth. Depending on which one you're comparing, if it's the HX, it seems like Dragon Range with Zen 4 is maybe 30 to 50% more efficient than Raptor Lake. Raptor Lake compared to Phoenix, it seems like it's a little closer, maybe like into AMD's 20% more efficient. Okay, so it seems like Meteor Lake is 50% more efficient than Raptor Lake. All right, but so AMD's already 20 to 50% better than that. If Hawk Point improves on efficiency at all, I'd suggest it's going to be pretty close to Meteor Lake. Again, with Meteor Lake probably having better idle power and maybe better curves to a certain degree, but if you push them, it's really not that different. And if Hawk Point's able to push its clock speeds up by 10% in graphics, I don't think there's going to be an appreciable difference between it and Meteor Lake. It just goes to show how important timing is, where if you take too long to launch, if Meteor Lake launched in the middle of 2023 for back to school, firmly against Phoenix, it would have just been the better thing. That's way more efficient. But you give AMD enough time, they can do a refresh of Phoenix that has some enhancements, and all of a sudden it's not that different. And then it'll be looming with everyone waiting for the Zen 5 variant. So I don't know. I think that's pretty worrisome for Intel's client, which they cannot afford to lose. But the other thing I want to bring up is, I don't know, do you have any thoughts about Nova Lake having a Vcache competitor variant?
I mean, not too many. Like, that's just so far into the future. Who knows how? Well, it will probably still be relevant. Who knows where AMD is going to be at that point? And
that's my thought as well.
It's just, it took them, 6 years to come up with a competitor to that? That's bad.
Yeah, when I hear Nova Lake Vcache competitor in 2027, I'm like, well, Zen 6 is supposed to launch into 25. So we're talking about a Zen 7, Zen 8, or again, I don't know. I haven't really heard anyone talk about Zen 7. There's some people who wonder if they're working on the successor to Zen, like as Zen 8 or something possibly, or Zen, like around there they might do it. I would suggest AMD should keep using Zen. It's the best brand name they've ever created. But, I don't know. Like, who knows what AMD will even have by then? For all we know, they will have evolved past the concept of Vcache.
Exactly. And yeah, as far as Zen goes, I don't know. The Ryzen branding, I think, is going to stick around for a while, even if they stop code naming their architectures Zen.
That's true. They could still call it Ryzen. So, all right. QH Freddy writes in and he says, can AI be the cache injection Intel needs to get their footing and really return to form? I mean, AI is going to boost every semiconductor company a bit right now, but I don't see how they're positioned to capitalize on this as well as AMD, and certainly compared to Nvidia.
I mean, yeah, I think Nvidia is so far ahead when it comes to that. I don't know who's going to outcompete Nvidia at this point when it comes to AI.
Well, and again, it's all relative here. Will Intel make more money from AI? Sure. Will Intel make more money from data center and client if the market starts booming again next year? Sure. But so will AMD. And if AMD ever gets to a scenario where they are half of the market, making higher margins, tides lift all boats, but AMD's boat may just be getting so much higher there that they'll save up enough money to really just go for the kill on a price war. They don't want to. Everything we've seen from AMD so far is they're taking what little they can at the margins and slowly chipping away, at the sides of Intel. And they've never really tried to go for a kill because, I think they saw that they tried to do that way too prematurely with their Athlon era. And they're only going to do that if it's already basically a done deal,
Yeah, I mean, and they're all companies, we talk about them as competitors, which they are, but like if AMD is making money, I'm sure AMD is happy.
Mm-hmm. Okay, let us then move on to another Intel story here with story number 5. My girlfriend likes dressing up our pets, and heck, I do too sometimes. Probably a lot more than they like it themselves. But you know what's scarier than being dressed up by a giant human like a strawberry or a tomato? Well, that's overpaying for Microsoft software, and that is why you should go to cdkeyoffer.com during their Halloween sales event. Whether it's Microsoft operating systems, Office products, or many of the latest games, cdkeyoffer.com provides PC gamers with a product that I honestly think this community needs, and that's just avoiding monopolistic prices on software, especially Windows and Office products. And you know, the Moore's Law is Dead team has been working with this company for a very long time and still does for a reason. They've been good to us, they've been good to the community. Heck, recently I got my girlfriend a new compact gaming PC as an early Christmas present, and when it came time to set up the Office software, I realized she was paying a lot of money for a year for Microsoft 365, and she was blown away to realize that that was a predatory service, and you can get Microsoft Professional 2021 Office for like $50, and then you're done. And you know what? You can get that around $50 cost if you just use the offer code Broken Silicon for 25% off, and you can use the code DieShrink as well to get 3% off every other piece of software on the website, whether it's Steam, EA, or Ubisoft keys. Using either of these codes, Broken Silicon or DieShrink helps support Moore's Law is Dead a ton, and it saves you money. So support this channel by supporting cdkeyoffer.com during their Halloween sales event today. Sapphire Rapids refresh details leaked. Quoting here from Video Cards, a chart shared by Yukions of the shows a simple trend that there are slightly more cores across the entire stack of the new workstation chips Intel is launching. They should have higher base clocks as well, and some parts should receive higher boost clocks. However, each part does technically list a higher TDP that's adjusted up by 10 to 25 watts. That said, this shouldn't be considered, let me see, a full refresh in a brand new architecture, just a power and core increase, which results in better clocks and higher performance. Well, you know, that's what Video Cards reports, but I actually want to put a quote on screen here. And this is something I've said before, but now I'm going to say it again because I just double checked with people. Based on what I am told, Sapphire Rapids refresh, the architecture in it for the new version of Fishhawk Falls, this is analogous to going from Alder Lake to Raptor Lake refresh and core performance increase. So I think what we're seeing here, and I'm just going to mostly quote what Yukions themselves said, not what's editorialized here by Video Cards, like, they're upping core counts by like 2 across the stack. They're also, you're getting higher boost clocks. That also comes parcel with, you know, hopefully lower power consumption at same levels of performance. Now, I will say though, the fact that if this ends up true, what Yukion's leaked shows higher TDP values, I don't know. Again, only Intel can decide to make something more efficient at same clocks. If they just decide to push voltage and everything to the moon again, I don't know. I mean, that would suggest to me they may be considering doing that. But I would suggest if they are doing that, you should expect at least a 20% performance boost over the predecessor. Oh, and it appears the new series really isn't going to be launching until next year. So I thought we had to cover this because it was interesting, but I don't know if they have that much to say outside of pointing out that with Zen 4 being out at the same time, I don't see how this is that competitive.
Wait, when you see the new series, do you mean this one or do you mean Emerald Rapids?
It is the Emerald Rapids version, basically, of Fishhawk Falls.
Okay. Yeah.
If you're confused, yes, they are calling it Sapphire Rapids Refresh on Workstation, even though it uses better than Sapphire Rapids architecture. Yeah.
All right. Yeah, that's a confusing decision. And my memory, though, what confused me about this is Emerald Rapids is coming out soon, too, isn't it? Or am I
supposedly December 14th at the same time as Meteor, like, I believe.
Okay. I don't know. Maybe it's good for people with workstations that are still on 4th gen or something. It seems a bit confusing that this is coming out so close to Emerald Rapids, though, supposedly.
Well, no, again, it is, though, Emerald Rapids. Okay. It's just called Sapphire Rapids Refresh.
Well, I guess they're just really loving their confusing marketing here, then. This is an odd launch to me.
I agree. It's you know, I had some hope for this like a couple months ago when it sounded like AMD may not launch Threadripper until early next year. And they're basically not doing it, but they're accelerating it as much as they can, which means by the time Sapphire Rapids refresh is out, AMD will have Zen 4 basically out too. And at that point, who cares? I mean, the whole point would have been, can you fix Sapphire Rapids Workstation and then launch a quarter before AMD? Because I have heard in OEM, AMD is starting to lose HEDT/workstation market share now. Like that people are fed up with being offered Zen 3 when Zen 5 rumors are basically all confirmed. Like, what is going on, AMD? And so that's why they're pushing up Threadripper. But they have pushed up Threadripper, so I don't really see a point in getting Sapphire Rapids refresh.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm guessing you don't have much else to say about this.
No.
All right. Well, let us then move on at a brisk pace to story number 6. RTX Super lineup and pricing targets leaked. The RTX 40 series Super rumors have been flying for a while now, and right before Halloween, Moore's Law had exclusively dispelled and confirmed what's really going on with this refresh series. In summary, to start off actually with what's going on with the supply with the 4090, currently the 4090 China ban is set to take effect on November 16th. Because of this, Nvidia might try to fight it to push it back farther, but it really doesn't matter. Either way, if you're in China, you're worried a ban's coming and you're going to buy it up. And if you're an AIB, you know that if a ban doesn't happen November 16th, it'll probably happen shortly after that. And so AIBs are rushing all of their 4090 stock into China right now, both to capitalize on the price gouging because of FOMO and also to legitimately try to sell through these cards in China and saturate the market before the ban takes place. So right now, NVIDIA is also benefiting from this by raising 8102 pricing to its partners. It's like they're completely not to blame on increased prices. And what that means is over the holiday season, 4090 prices are going up. And correspondingly, you should expect like the 4080 pricing to drift up a little bit too. Anyways, that's supposed to be temporary. I'm told that by the first half of next year, 4090 pricing should start going back down again. But also, NVIDIA doesn't seem like they mind that this will happen after the Super Series is launched anyways, which I also detailed in this video, that there are 3 main super cards. There is the 16 gigabyte full 8103 4080 Super with 24 gigabit per second memory. It should raise performance by over 5% and maybe up to 15%. Then there's the 16 gigabyte 8103 4070 Ti Super that should bring close to or maybe 10 to 20% weaker than 4080 performance, down in price with more RAM. And then there's the 12 gigabyte 8104 4070 Super that brings near 4070 Ti performance down in price as well. Meanwhile, the 4090 and then below the 4070, not a lot of changes expected, if any changes there. 4090 is selling so well, they have to raise prices. So no, there will not be some 4090 Ti, nor some 8102 4080 Ti. I can't believe these. Again, I just have to say, like, the people that were saying there was going to be a 4080 Super based on 8102, why would NVIDIA do that when they're raising the price on 8102? They have no trouble selling this. They're not going to find a way to sell that for less. Those are people guessing. But that's just, it doesn't even pass the sniff test. And I'm actually told below the 4070, the 4060 Ti 16 gigabyte at 450 or less, and the 4060 below 300. Now that some pricing's been adjusted to partners to allow them to sell it for less, I'm told those are selling fine enough that they don't see a need to bother with any price drops or 4060 Super stuff. Seems like it's just these 3 mid-range products. And well, the final thing to discuss is they may be more aggressively priced than you might expect. It sounds like worst case scenario, the 4070 Super would be like 700, the 4070 Ti Super would be 900 or maybe 1,000, and then the 4080 Super will be the same price of the 4080 right now at 1,200. But apparently they are also considering just dropping these in at their predecessors' price points. 4070 Super for 600, 4080 or 4070 Ti Super for 800, and then 4080 Super for 1,000, which is more aggressive than I'm suspecting most people were expecting NVIDIA to be with these products. But it shows that NVIDIA is worried about losing mid-range market share right now. Furthermore, I would suspect that they would do this in case AI falls apart or an AI bubble bursts, so they can direct all of their stock to actually competitively priced graphics cards in the mid-range to high-end. And the main conclusion of all of this is then, when you look at the 4090 price increases going on over the holiday season, and the fact that, I mean, think about it. If NVIDIA raises performance between the 4080 and 4070 Super, and 4080 Super, like if they go from like a 10 to 15% performance increase while dropping price by 20%, 1200 to 1000. That's like a 30 to 40% price performance increase for what the 4080 Super would be over the 4080. And because of that, I have to say, if you want a 7900 XTX for below 900 or a 7900 XT for below 800, I don't think that's going to age badly. You're going to get 20 and 24 gigabyte cards that will be still competitive with whatever pricing Nvidia throws out next year. But if you need to buy Lovelace, or if you insist on only buying Lovelace over RDNA 3, do not buy it right now. Prices are up, and they're about to do a seismic change in price to performance, or at least they might. And don't be the person that bought a $1,200 4080 right before the $1,000 4080 Super launch, is what I would suggest to everybody here. So yeah, what did you think about this?
I would say if the less aggressive pricing, if AMD just formalizes the street pricing, maybe with a little bit of a drop in price from what you typically see, I think AMD would still be the way to go with most of these cards, like versus the 7900 XT and the 7900 XTX versus any of these three super cards. But I don't know if they drop it to the more aggressive. If Nvidia goes with the more aggressive pricing, I think that's honestly pretty compelling. Like something stronger than a 4080 for 1,000 versus a 7900 XTX for 900. That's a more dealer's choice. Get whichever one you want, and maybe go for the 4080. I mean, sure, it has less RAM. I mean, 4080 Super, I should say. Sure, it has less RAM, but it has the features from Nvidia, and I don't know. Presumably, it would be like what 10%. Like if it's 10% stronger than a 4080, and that's slightly better raster even than the 7900 XTX. So I don't know. The more aggressive pricing seems like they're actually trying to challenge AMD's price performance to some extent, whereas the less aggressive pricing, I think it's more or less just we think we can still maintain dominance while having still worse but not as bad as it previously was price performance.
Yeah. And just so everybody knows, I don't remember if I said this in the video, but like I distinctly asked, really, you might not only make it, and doing the math here, I would suggest that it seems like the 4080 Super is highly likely, and I just got feedback from a contact right now while we're talking, Dan, that yes, the 4080 Super, full 8103, 24 gigabit per second memory, this is the golden samples, that I would suggest that places it pretty firmly at 8 to 12% better than the 4080, so 10% better.
Okay.
I also asked, like, really, you're gonna make it better and then charge 1,000? And the person told me, hell yeah, let's go toe to toe with the 7900 XTX finally. And that was a pretty firm, yeah, this might happen. Now, with the 4070 Ti Super, the 4070 Super, I don't know. I would almost suggest what they would do with that is discontinue the old 40, well, maybe not the old 4070, but at least the old 4070 Ti. Maybe then price it at $850 and $650, so they can say, well, if you bought it before, it's actually $50 more now, to try to make people feel a little less burned. But that's kind of what I'm expecting, though, like $850 and $650 for those, and then $1,000 for the 4080, or yeah, certainly not more than $1,200.
Yeah, I mean, I just think with that and AMD's and Nvidia having slightly more software features, I think that does put them in a position where they might be, I think they're probably a better option than AMD at those price points, even if it's like $650 and $850 or something. Now, if that comes with a discontinuation of something like the 4070, where that's currently, I think, selling mostly for $550, that would be a bit of a loss, because
I don't think they need to do that, though. I think they can. The 4070 is really disabled, so I think they could just keep selling that for $550, or maybe even let it go to $500 or $530 to pick up in sales against the 7800 XT. And then I think you could still just have a lineup that's like $550, $650, $850, $1,000 instead of right now, which is almost $600, $800, $1,200. Like, I think that there's still room to do that, and you have to remember that they can just discontinue these old models and like use them for other things. Like they can use the perfect 4070 Ti yields for like trickling out a little bit of that here and there and just sending them to data center or something for, I believe that they've got other products, or to laptop as well.
Yeah, and if the 4070 Ti ended up getting discontinued or soft discontinued or or unofficially discontinued, I should say, I don't think that would be a huge loss. I think the 4070 where it's currently at isn't bad though, so I don't think that would be good if they discontinue that. But like you said, they need to disable them, and they need to do something with the disabled dies.
Well, let me say this too. We'll get to this in the wrap up, but the 7900M, we have at least one first benchmark out. It seems to beat the 4080 laptop chip on average and by single digits. Well, think about it. The 4080 laptop chip is a slightly disabled 4070 Ti. Might I suggest that all Nvidia is going to do is launch a 4080 Super laptop that's just the full die now for laptop, and then take the yields they were using for 4070 laptops. I'm sorry, for 4080 laptops, which now they'll have extra because yields are improving, and just say, yeah, now that's the 4070 Super on desktop or something, Like yeah, that. I'd almost wonder if that's what they would do, is just swap that so they have the stronger thing in laptop that they need, and then they have the cheaper thing in desktop now, and then, you're done. You can keep selling the 4070 for $550. It's fine.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, there's no rule that I know of that they can't just shift dies around between laptop and desktop if it makes more sense to do it that way.
And again, just yields have improved, so they probably have more space to do that in both departments now. So that's kind of what I'm thinking. I guess the final thing to bring up about this just is, do you think if Nvidia goes the full Monty, 1,000, let's say even just 800 and 600 as well, and then drops the price on the 4070 to 500, I think that's the most they would do. Like, let's say they do that. Do you think AMD is screwed, or do you think if the 4070 became the same price as the 7800 XT, do you think, from what I hear, they can't even keep the 7800 XT in stock for any amount of time? It's selling crazy well. Do you think it could still keep selling well? And do you think AMD has to do more than just cement street pricing? Because think about what I'm saying here. If they move something, and from what I've heard, by the way, today, just so everyone knows, it kind of to me sounds like the 4070 Ti Super will be maybe a solid 10% weaker than the 4080 or something. That would still place it a solid 10 to 15% stronger than the 7900 XT. If they price that at 800, doesn't AMD have to drop the price on the 7900 XT if they want it to keep selling well, or do you think they don't have to?
I think if at $1,000 versus $900 for the XTX, I think that's relatively competitive still. But I think below that, AMD would need to redo their line. Well, not redo their lineup, redo their pricing, because no, I don't think a 7800 XT should command the same price as a 4070. So if Nvidia dropped the 4070 all the way to $500, I think AMD might need to, I don't know, chop their prices by like $50 for like the 7800 XT and the.
Well, let me ask you though, the 7800 XT has 16 gigabytes instead of 12, and in raster it's about the same, if not slightly better. You think if they were the same price, and a friend asked you, hey, $500 4070 12 gigabyte, $500 7800 XT 16 gigabyte, you would say, get the 4070.
I think so.
It is more efficient, to be fair. It does have better ray tracing that you can't use in some games because there's not enough RAM for it. But
yeah, the 12 gigabytes is borderline an issue amount of RAM, and I'm not sure going into the future how big of a problem it will be if you have 12 gigabytes. Right now, it's not really a problem, but it will be in the future. So depending on how long you're keeping it, I guess might be the determining factor on which one you get.
And you would definitely say if the 4070 Ti Super 16 gigabyte, God, this name's really long, if that's $800, and I would assume it would be 10 to 15% stronger than a 7900 XT 20 gigabyte, do you think that, how cheap I assume you think if they were the same price, you would definitely recommend the 4070 Ti Super, right?
Yeah.
But like, would 750 make you recommend the 7900 XT, or do you actually think it has to go all the way down to 700?
That might be 700. I don't think the 20 versus 16 gigabytes of RAM is that too far of a gulf at that point to say to go with the 7900 XT instead.
If it was 700 but not 750, pay $50 for yeah. I think I agree. So we'll have to see what happens here. But I think there's room for AMD to breathe, but there's definitely evidence here that Nvidia is considering taking this very seriously next year. Okay, well, let us now move on to the final wrap up. These are, of course, these stories that we didn't think deserved a full story, but definitely deserve mentioning. We've already talked about the 7900M beating the 4080, so I don't think we need to get into that. But again, I don't have much to say about it. I just think it's kind of funny. The A800 outside is now being sold outside of China, and it's just interesting. Nvidia announced all of these China-only models for AI cards that overnight they were like, guess they're not China only.
Well, they don't really have that much of an option at this point. So,
here's an interesting one. AMD finally acknowledges that they have Little Phoenix. This has been a very bizarre situation where we know Little Phoenix exists. We've even seen some models on AMD's specs sheets, like on the website, show a smaller die size than the rest of Phoenix. And yet they just pretend it's not its own thing. They just keep saying Phoenix. Well, now they've fully acknowledged Phoenix is out there, and they actually put out some pretty snarky slides here showing basically dissing Intel, saying we have the same IPC for all cores, same cache, no extra tasks required. I don't know if you had any thoughts on this.
No, I'm confused on why it took them so long to actually like talk about it, but hopefully it goes some things. I don't know. That's always the thing with AMD is it takes forever for their APUs to actually end up in products.
Well, I think they were already in it though, just not a lot of them. They were in Z1s, but not the Z1 Extreme. Like it's pretty obvious the Z1 is Little Phoenix.
Yeah, that's true.
So yeah, I don't know. I guess the only other thing I'd bring up is you can say it's snarky if you want, but I mean, it is true. And I do feel like I have to keep reminding people C cores are not little cores. They're still just big cores. And all AMD is doing is optimizing how many cores in a thermal size they can really get away with boosting high. Mm-hmm. I think some people have said, should they call out how many are C cores or not? And I'm sure you can find it online if you look hard enough in the specs. But as long as when they say they have 6 cores, they are boosting the base clock they show is what all cores can hit. I don't see why they really need to say anything because they're big cores, you know?
Yeah, I don't know if they would prefer.
As long as all cores hit the advertised base clock. But if they do, I don't see why they need to say anything else besides that.
If they all hit the advertised base clock and then they say like however many non-C cores will reach this boost clock, that's I'm guessing how they would advertise it.
Mm-hmm. Well, but right now we already know that they don't all hit peak boost clock at the same time anyway. So from AMD's perspective, they might say, have you seen what Intel's boost clocks are? They don't have to tell you anything. So I guess I have a link here. I don't know that I have much to say, hence again why it's a wrap-up discussion, but AMD seems to be really sparsely releasing driver updates for Vega and Polaris at this point. I've seen some people claim that means they're about to discontinue them, but I don't know. From what I've seen on their roadmaps, Barcello, which is rebranded, I believe, Cezanne, they're going to sell that into, let me look at my roadmap again, just so I remember here. I guess Barcello ends in 2024, actually. Maybe that's when they'll stop selling it as like a main part of their APU lineup. So I don't know. I don't think they're going to disable Vega and Polaris support until that happens. I think you're just going to see like maybe one driver update, maybe 2 a year or something. And it's going to probably stop after 2025, though.
Oh, I mean, at that point, how old will Polaris be?
I think for the RX 480 and 580 argument, there's no room for complaining here. This thing's going to end up being about a decade old by the time they stop supporting it with new drivers. And even then, you have to remember, I have a Fermi GTX 580 over there, And it still runs most games I try to run without any new drivers for a very long time. That's because they've basically done what they can to optimize it. There's an argument there that they don't really need to do per game optimizations that much anymore after a decade of honing in on how games should run your graphics card. The only thing I would say, though, Dan, is if they sell Barcello with Vega through 2024, I think that's screwed up if that doesn't get new driver updates a year after it's been out. The Polaris isn't the issue. It's their APUs that still use it.
Well, if they're launching an APU with that architecture with Vega in 2024, I mean, I think they need to give it at least semi-continuous support for like 2 years, because I don't think when you buy a new product, you're expecting that it's almost at legacy or discontinued. They should continue supporting that. Now, when it's like the 580, which they don't still manufacture new 580s, do they? And it wouldn't surprise me if they
my
did.
understanding is I believe, everyone listening here, I believe they're done doing the like global foundries, by the way, runs of Polaris, but they have warehouses where the dies themselves are stockpiled. And when you see, you used to see some runs during the recent shortages of Polaris, and now there seems like a lot of like no name or companies you've never heard of from Asia making 580s and selling them for like $80 to $100 on Amazon still. My understanding is they're just pulling from those stockpiles and building new boards for them. So they're not ordering more from global foundries anymore, I don't think.
I mean, I do think that there's an argument, though, if they're still putting it in new products. I agree. It demands some level of support.
They should keep supporting it through 27, I think, at least.
Yeah. Now, if you're like, the reason I asked that question, though, is
I say should, not will, people. I'm saying my opinion is it comes off. I had a friend who had I think it was steamroller or excavator APU plus some AMD Pro. This was, of course, like 5-6 years ago. But I remember like 2 years, not even 2 years after he got it, he had trouble updating drivers anymore because they didn't support the APU's graphics card. For some reason, the laptop, was an MSI one, made you download one driver stack for both the APU and the GPU, but the APU wasn't supported anymore, like a year after he got it or something. And then that caused a ton of headaches for him. And I just would hope AMD doesn't do that again, because that's pretty messed up.
Yeah. That's, if it was all used parts at this point, it's like, what you're getting into when you buy like an 8-year-old used part. But
but if they're still selling new, we would hope they
need to
support
it. So.
All right, DLSS officially is coming to Starfield. I really don't know how much I have to say about this, but it's been a long time coming. Of course, this channel caught flack for saying, no, Starfield will get DLSS. There is no contract stopping it. And now, again, there it is. It's coming to Starfield, guys. There was no contract.
Yeah, I know. It's really fun that now, even when a game that's sponsored by AMD gets DLSS support, that's somehow evidence that they're hiding DLSS support.
It's classic conspiracy theory. It's where even evidence against your conspiracy becomes supporting evidence. That means it's a conspiracy theory at that point. NVIDIA CEO Jensen Huang, AI Bubble, writes it and says, why is AMD insisting on ruining gamers' experience for RTX by forcing Ubisoft to use DLSS 2 instead of DLSS 3 or 3.5 and Avatar Frontiers of Pandora? Certainly that wasn't just a decision the dev made, right?
Yes, the beta it should have the beta feature of DLSS 3.5, or hell, even alpha, depending on how you look at it.
No, but I like the joke here made by this patron of like,
I know.
Everything that isn't perfect now must be AMD's fault for some reason. I don't know what's, but I don't want to get into that really anymore. That couldn't.
AMD killed my dog.
Shame. What?
AMD killed my dog, Tom.
That's right. I mean, at a certain point, you'd think that's what people think. I mean, with the way they report on some of this stuff with zero supporting evidence. But all right. So this one here didn't quite get a main story because I reached out to a few people. Some of them didn't really have a lot of details they could verify. And at a minimum, from what I was told from some of my contacts, this is something that won't make a big difference for at least a couple of years. But AMD is allegedly partnering with Qualcomm and Samsung for the next edition of FSR. And it's because they want their smartphone and supposedly laptop SoCs to be able to use the best version of upscaling they can, and they just want to support FSR further. And I think this is a pretty big deal potentially a few years from now. Again, I'm told this won't really change anything in the short term, but having Qualcomm and Samsung co-developing FSR with AMD, that's the type of thing you'd want.
Yeah, I mean, that's pretty big. Qualcomm is, we don't talk about them much on the podcast, but Qualcomm's one of the biggest chip makers in the world. So, yeah, that's a big deal.
Well, and, think about, again, I don't think this really changes anything that much for NVIDIA DLSS. It's to the point where it's so good, and NVIDIA's proven they will spend the money that they're just going to pay to have DLSS in a bunch of games. And it's going to be its own feature, no matter if there's an open source option. So I don't think this really changes much for DLSS. For Xe super sampling, though, you now have AMD making FSR that works on the consoles, that also works on Samsung and Qualcomm devices. Who is going... I mean, look, Intel's going to have to spend for them to put Xe super sampling in every game then, because if consoles, smartphones, tablets, AMD desktop and laptops, and all of AMD's APUs, by the way, use FSR, that is going to make it the non-DLSS standard, though. And DLSS is just there as its own perk, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it does kind of turn FSR into the default almost.
All right. And then Samsung's increasing NAND prices. From some people I talked to, it kind of seemed like this is just a cyclical thing, but kind of a PSA here. Like I've said, the market's mostly bottomed, and I don't think things are going to be that much cheaper moving forward, outside of, again, specific things like super forcing down NVIDIA prices. But if you want a new SSD, I just got a 2 terabyte. It was on a sale. I think it was, a 2 terabyte Gen 4 SSD that's like 6.6 gigabytes per second for like $97. So now's a good time to buy a new SSD, and I think they're only going to get more expensive.
Yeah, I mean, I might. It's pushing me to think maybe I should get another one. But
you have a free NVMe slot?
Yeah.
So I don't know. I'd consider that. And Gen 5 NVMEs aren't that badly priced compared to a year ago. They're not the cheapest, but they're worth looking at now if you want the fastest SSD as your boot drive. But additionally, I have to say Gen 3 and not the top Gen 4, not like the 7.3 to 7.5 gigabyte per second ones, but ones over 6.5 gigabytes per second, they're way cheaper now. And the Gen 3 SSDs that max out Gen 3, just still probably going to be fast enough for most games for the foreseeable future. I mean, those ones are getting pretty bargain bin, like almost better than hard drive pricing per gigabyte sometimes. So I would recommend that to people as well. If you see the latest Samsung Gen 5 and you're like, well, that doesn't seem that cheap. Remember, the 90% to maxing out Gen 4 is like half the price it was a year ago or something, or more, maybe a third the price. It's crazy. All right. In another story here in the wrap up, we have that there was a teardown of the PlayStation 5 Slim. I really don't have a whole lot to say about this. Really, the biggest takeaway, which is something I think we basically already knew, it still has 6 nanometer silicon. It's using the same silicon for the PS5 Slim that they were using a year ago. They just finally got around to making a better chassis. And then let me get to the final thing in the wrap up here, which almost could have been argued to be its own story. Boy, are there a lot of issues around Modern Warfare 3.
Yeah.
Apparently the campaign's getting horribly bad reviews. And I saw that, I guess when you boot up an Xbox, not when because when I first saw this headline, my brain said, I assume when you boot up Modern Warfare 2 now, or any Call of Duty, they try to spam you with Modern Warfare 3. No, they just spam you with Modern Warfare 3 when you turn on an Xbox now. That's pretty screwed up.
Yeah, it is. A lot of people are pissed off about it. It prompts you to immediately buy it, and the options to boot to your device are grayed out, so it's harder to see them. And you can buy Modern Warfare 3 by pressing A 3 times. From booting up your console. And I saw people online
say that last part again.
I read this. If you press A 3 times, you've bought Modern Warfare 3.
Oh my God. So if you're just turning on your console and you try to spam past it, it makes you buy it?
Basically. I mean, I'm sure you can get a refund if you do that on accident, but I'm sure there are people online asking, do they think this is going to convince me to buy it? And it's like, that's part of it. Part of it is they're hoping you're going to buy it on accident, because that's what all of this BS always is. Mm-hmm. And also, Tom, you'll be happy to hear, guess how big the install size is?
I think I saw it was like around 250 gigabytes or something.
200, and you have to install Modern Warfare 2 to install Modern Warfare 3, because the central hub for the game is just Modern Warfare 2.
Yeah, I was just Googling around, by the way. I'm seeing the IGN campaign score is a 4 out of 10, which again, I'm not saying you should swear by reviewers like they're gospel. I am saying that's crazy low.
Yeah.
And
that's not good.
At least typically rule of thumb is if everyone's saying bad things, it's probably not perfect. You know, there's rumors, and I don't know the veracity or really much of the backstory on this, but what I've heard is, or what I've read at least once, is that this was going to be an expansion with a new campaign, and then they decided to just make it a full game like a year or whatever after Modern Warfare 2. But Modern Warfare 2 already 2 years old.
No, it's only one.
It's only one. So yeah, that would kind of explain why it came out a year later, wouldn't it?
Yeah, it's confusing to me because Modern Warfare 2... okay, so yeah, Sledgehammer is developing this one, because the Modern Warfare games have typically been made by Infinity Ward. But I think Infinity Ward's made all of them up till this point. I don't know. Mm-hmm. This doesn't sound good to me. That's all.
No. Looks like a pass for us. And we like the previous Modern Warfares, the previous new Modern Warfares, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, I just thought we had to talk about that a bit. All right, let us now get to the final reader mails. Quick Jumper writes in and he says, "Hey, Tom and Dan, in our line of work, I use AI to classify different types of toxic comments on social media. LLMs have been game changers in this area as well as in other areas. Therefore, I don't think the AI is overhyped. It's real. Again, Quick Jumper, you have to understand when I say overhyped, Google is still here. Yahoo is still here. Pets.com isn't. Like, I don't know if and actually to back up what my point is, he goes on to say on a hardware level, I think he says on the software level, improvements are great. On the hardware level, the story is different. I'm training models on very big data sets, but I am very content with a 3090. I think most of the businesses never really worked with AI and are overestimating how much cards they will need. But after they train the models, they realistically won't need as much performance as they thought. It's a messy period, but once businesses realize they don't need that much hardware, they will be a lot less willing to buy overpriced cards. Also, if AMD offers very good competition to CUDA, then it's game over, I think. NVIDIA should really think about that. My question for Tom, what is the current situation on the market? You mentioned demand. Right, so you said AI. You have to understand, right, when I say overhyped, and I don't even know that I've really said it that way. I'd say it's a bubble. Over, not no hype. There should be hype. But let's put it this way. If Lovelace managed to triple ampere performance, but everyone thought it would 6x it, that means it was overhyped, even though it 3x'd it. Mm-hmm. You know, that's what overhyped means. And you're giving an example here where you're like, I don't think we need these expensive cards. And then, yes, I've already talked about demand softening. Well, exactly. Demand is softening because I think a lot of companies are realizing they don't need a 1000 H100s. And some of them are probably realizing they don't need to use it for half of their stuff anymore.
Yeah. I mean, at a certain point, it's just going to not be needed. It's just not going to be needed. And there's going to be a bunch of companies that were developed around using these hardware that go defunct because they didn't figure out a way to actually monetize their product.
Techno writes in and says, do you believe Intel graphics is in a much more untenable position than it was a year ago when you initially said Intel's GPU division has been killed? Well, it was killed. I didn't just say it, but and then now they're saying it is unkilled. So technically, I've already been right in my opinion, because they did end AXG and then fire all the people in charge. But I think the better way to phrase this, Techno, would be, is Intel graphics, do you have more pessimism around Intel graphics now or less compared to a year ago? What would you say, Dan?
It's a weird mix. I would kind of say less. It's weird. It seems like their iGPUs are having problems meeting to getting to the place where they're supposed to be to actually be put in the products they were initially supposed to be put into. So from that perspective, it doesn't seem like they're doing well by any means. And the development of Battle Mage doesn't seem like it's doing that. Seems to be on about the track that we initially said it was. So
I actually spoke to someone about this today that said it's people are not optimistic about Battle Mage inside Intel right now.
Yeah, so I mean, from that perspective, no, I don't think they're in a better place now, and they seem to be having a hard time even keeping their integrated up to stuff at this point. So, I Meteor Lake.
To be honest, I wish this question, and I'm sure it will be again, would have been asked about a month and a half from now. I want to see launch reviews for Meteor Lake and see if it boots everything up perfectly. And, theoretically, it should be 20, maybe 30% stronger than Phoenix graphics. Is it in every game? Because my A770 here, it doesn't crash anymore from what I've tested. I can't say I've done like a 24/7 stability test, but at least I didn't run into issues when I used it for a few hours, which is far cry from what it used to be just a couple months ago. But I will say, well, in some games, it got close to a 3070. There were games, like a third of games, it performs like a 3050. And so what I'm going to want to see with Meteor Lake is I don't want to see its time spy score. I don't want to see if, I'm trying to think of a game where it overperformed. I think Bannerlord actually was one of them. But I don't want to see one game where it performs how it's supposed to. I want to see, do a third of games, does it actually lose to Rembrandt? Because if that happens, its stability is there, but its performance wonkiness, I'm not Alchemist Plus is in Meteor. This is a new generation of graphics or architecture. So did they fix the bottlenecks? Is it balanced now? If it's not, I still have the same reservations I've had.
Yeah, and I don't know, maybe this is a question that needs to just be re-asked every 3 months or something, because that seems to be the pace that Intel has giving us updates about how their graphics in general are doing, whether that be iGPUs or their dedicated GPUs. And I mean, hopefully in the future, our prognosis is better than it is right now, but there's no evidence that their graphics are doing well.
Yeah, and I guess the final thing I would then say, just to directly answer his question, I don't know. Some people I talked to today kind of thought that Battle Mage was going to end up the same as Alchemist, minus one change, which is to say, when they say the same as Alchemist, launching so late, look, 2023 is over. Where's Battle Mage? Where's the Alchemist Plus desktop lineup? It's not coming out, guys. Where is it? If it ends up coming out end of 2024 or 2025, it's going to be the same as Alchemist. You have a product that's really launching a year after it should have against competition that's a gen ahead of you, with that you can't possibly price at a profitable way, and has a weird launch. That's kind of what they still expect. I haven't heard that much optimism about its performance relative to the competition, nor that it will launch in time to compete with what it should be, which is Lovelace and RDNA 3, not RDNA 4 and Blackwell. But I do hear the drivers might work at launch. It's just, am I more or less optimistic, right? Because now I think the drivers may get there, but if the drivers get there and they're selling what should be a 4080 competitor as a 4070 competitor a year or two after the 4070 came out, I don't possibly see how they could sell that profitably. I've already got people I'm talking to right now wondering if it will be easy. Like Nvidia is getting pretty aggressive with the margins, it seems, on the 4070 Ti Super. Right. So they're getting aggressive. They're making a profit, but they're getting aggressive at let's say $800 with this thing. If Intel makes a Battle Mage die that's costs the same to make as that, I don't know how they could possibly profit at 500. And so it's funny how I'm more optimistic about the drivers, but I don't know that the numbers work that they can launch this and make money. So
no, it doesn't.
How would you define that? More or less optimistic? I'd say average is the same, but I'm more optimistic about some things, which is to say, if they just launch low end and keep working on their APU stuff, maybe they'll get into a place where their drivers are stable enough that they can make a push in 4 years from now. I guess from that perspective, I'm more optimistic, but I don't see how they can afford to launch another loss leader. They can't,
Well, yeah, there's just, we talked about that. There's just Intel is not in a position where they can do loss leaders to force their way into a market.
No, they're at like 0% margin in data center. Their client margins aren't great. They can't afford to do this anymore. And they could before, but now they've run out of money. So again, about the same, more optimistic that Arc could live on is something that eventually comes back. Less optimistic that they can afford to be aggressive next year, which is what I think people really want. Hollow Knight writes in and he says, just a thought. Let's assume the worst case scenario for Intel graphics, that it's completely shut down. Well, they're always going to have some graphics division for APUs. And so no, they'll call it something else. It would just not really be the same as what it used to be. But he goes, so they maybe work with Nvidia to get Nvidia tiles into their APUs. This actually could be a major deal breaker for massive business contracts because Nvidia requires an email to access Nvidia features. This technically is only for GeForce Experience, but it still may be a major problem for some companies, don't you think? Even on my governmental laptop, I have access to all Intel graphics tech that my iGPU has, no login required. Well, first of all, I think Nvidia would just allow businesses to not need it, number one. Number two, remember Intel with the Vega GHGL? They used an Intel driver stack for the Radeon tile. So, so I think that's what they would do again if they used an NVIDIA tile, and that completely sidesteps the entire issue.
Yeah, or once again, NVIDIA would
if that's a deal breaker,
email address if in those circumstances.
And it's a funny thing. I've heard people at NVIDIA say that they don't trust working with Intel right now. Well, they have a graphics division that's trying to function, but they will be gung-ho with salesmen going over to Intel if they kill XG. They're like, oh yeah, we'll want to be in their APUs. We already have plans for a tile variants of upcoming architectures, should that happen. But it's not going to happen unless we're sure they won't just be stealing our information to make their own cards.
I'm sure they would love.
Yeah. So Carbon Cry writes in with the final Raider mail. He says, read the AntiLag Plus bans, which of course is AntiLag Plus got you banned from a bunch of competitive online games with the latest drivers, or one of the latest drivers. He says, well, now high DPI mice are getting people banned as well in these games out of nowhere. Maybe AMD still messed up, but can we not forget that most anti-cheat softwares are pure shit, especially VAC? I think that's a fair point, but I did talk to someone else today about this, and everyone I talk to still thinks it's an insane blunder that AMD let this happen. Yes, we can admit that there's been ban issues before. There were DRM issues with little cores on Alder Lake for a bit, but this is still a fundamental mistake here. It's a feature that's supposed to be for esports gamers, and it got them banned. That's a mistake by AMD. We can acknowledge it's, I guess, not all their fault, but the buck has to stop somewhere. And it's like, well, do you want to be right or do you want to win? And AMD's not winning if they complain that what they did got their people banned. So,
yeah, I mean, when one of your, you would think AMD would put more effort into, at a minimum, navigating around the shitty software that is VAC, or most anti-lag software. I mean, not anti-lag, most anti-cheat softwares. And they didn't. Which you think they would have caught in testing, that it's getting accounts banned. And they clearly didn't.
Yeah. All right. Well, that is going to do it for this rather arduous episode for us to record. But, you know, sometimes that just happens. If all things go well, you'll not even tell anything went wrong on our end a couple times. But, you know, it did. But we made sure, the show must go on. And we made sure it went on, even if we wasted 30 more minutes at least recording this than we wanted to late at night.
Yes. But Moulin Rouge, Tom, the show must go on. My internet connection is like Nicole Kidman's tuberculosis in that movie.
I can't think of a better way to compare this, nor a better way to end this episode than bringing that up. Moulin Rouge, Nicole Kidman dying of tuberculosis. Well, somehow not getting her partner sick with it. I don't know. But yep. So that's going to do it for this episode of Broken Silicon. Unlike tuberculosis, subscribing will not kill you. So please subscribe to the Moore's Law Z YouTube channel. You know, subscribe on your podcast app of choice. Give us reviews there. And please tell your friends about us and join the Patreon. We actually just had it's a full-length episode, basically a bonus podcast / video of why the PC gaming renaissance happened and then fell apart, or ended, should we say. And that's there for just $2 a month. You'll get access to that bonus 1.5 hour video looking at that, and then hundreds of other bonus pieces of content that never have ads. Please support us on Patreon. There, we can't do this without our patrons. And otherwise, yeah, thanks for watching, thanks for listening, and have a good week, everybody.
Goodbye, everyone.
This podcast was brought to you by the YouTube channel and website Moore's Law is Dead. Moore's Law is Dead and Broken Silicon are trademarks of their creator, Tom. That guy is me, and I am indeed the creator, editor, writer, and showrunner of Moore's Law is Dead podcasts, videos, articles, and other media. However, it's not just me. Moore's Law is Dead is a team, with Broken Silicon co-hosted by my brother Dan, audio editing by Gerard Cortez, renders being done by the industrial designer Jean-Philippe Clermont, and special assistance is also provided by Carmen Cry and Carrie Nosugad as well. Find all of our information at www.mooreslawsdead.com on the About/Support page. In the event you do want to hire me for consulting work, hire Gerard for audio work, hire Jean-Philippe for industrial design work, or you're interested in working with Carbon Cry or Carrie Nosugada as well, you can also find our long-term sponsors on that page if you want to show them some love for putting food on our tables. Or you can also mail us some love. You can send letters or hardware donations to the following address: Moore's Law is Dead, P.O. Box 60632 in Nashville, Tennessee, zip code 37206. Although, to be honest, the best way to show Moore's Law is Dead some love is to support us on Patreon. Patrons are what makes Moore's Law is Dead content truly possible. Every month, and really every day, depending on who you're talking about, me, Gerard, Dan, and Jean-Philippe are working tirelessly to provide a steady stream of content that we could not keep doing unless we knew the work was possible without being reliant on sponsors dictating every little thing we put out. Don't get us wrong, we love our sponsors, but we love directly working for you, our fans, much more. If you have any extra money, even a couple free dollars a month, consider supporting us directly on Patreon. Those couple of monthly dollars will get you access to the exclusive podcast Die Shrink, voting on subjects of future podcast episodes, the ability to ask guest questions, and of course, access to the Moore's Law is Dead Discord full of like-minded people who I am sure would love to meet you. I am one of them. Additionally, higher tiers get access to early, ad-free episodes of Broken Silicon, the ability to ask questions in all Broken Silicon episodes and Loose Ends live streams ahead of the recording, and the entire back catalog of Moore's Law is Dead podcasts, in addition to having thanks in the credits of videos and podcasts depending on the tier, with other perks available as well. And hey, if you cannot afford to support us directly every month, please do share Moore's Law is Dead videos and podcasts with friends and family, and on social media and websites like Reddit, and give Broken Silicon a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts or your preferred podcast app of choice. All of this does really help us so much. But like I said, this podcast would not be possible without the patrons directly providing predictable and reliable support every month. And so now it is time to give a personal thanks to the greatest of the fans. The following supporters are at the 10 gigahertz or higher supported levels: Brad Medlin, Drita Full, Z Chits, Daniel D, Ian Clifford, Aaron Close, Jan Runner, Daniel Hyde, Jeezy Ziggy, Brian Riggleman, MJB1, Sam Miller, Deke, SNES Chalmers, Nicholas Buckner, Jim Ferriera, Valco Malev, Jensen Wang, Andrew S, Gregory S. Ackers, Art Castro, Evan Dinglehart, 4room.com, Chris Rich, Craig Wanchek, 3DS Boy 08, Albuma, Compressed Earth Blocks, Shredbird, Dr. Forbin, Benjamin Cannon, Jonathan, Blank, Frederic, Holden Mobley, Jake223, Jake Martin, Sammy Malas, Silicky, Jordan Simkovic, Stefan Hart, Julian Leaked, Mead and Pork, The Boss Haas, Tim Robb, Penta Wenta, Travis Gooding, Stefan Mads, Zutsu Taylor, Stephen Coates, Roger Davies, Michael McGee, Greg, Patrick Groh, Amiable Chief, Tommy, Mark Mitchell, I Should, Mark Raidmaker, James Anderson, Cole Addict, Judson N, Chrysantine, Colin Tadars, The Eternal Dreamers, Cameron Wesley Sager, Henry Shang, Nithra Zink, Michelle Bell, D31337 Antics, Hexapuma, Toka, Reginald Ari, Teak Autumn, Jackson Miller, JSMMH, Gaiman Since Reagan, Jeff Sedler, Loophole 35, Windstar, James I. Raider, Corey Leonard, Little Germany, Shea, Milton, Pulse Media, Dave Schultz, Melodic Warrior, Mac Daffy, Seven Dick, Chuck Glidden, Brett Jones, Austin Haggerty, Justin Bustle, I-711-700K, Jamie Witters, Jovit, Hardland, Slushboss C2, Mai Sharona, Earth Taurus, Jensen Angima, Joseph Kelly, Samuel Park, Keith Moore, Himsa Gun, Tails2299, Neil Vale, Verga, John, Venti CZ, Sisyphus, The Forbidden Juice, Per Leakman, RB Racer, AC, Richard Cowgill, Win Wang, Michael Cozy, Dr. J Mad, Alex Vega, Free D, Brian Wright, John Swin, Joe LaMartina, Kiko Elbergun, Solarized 80, Thalo215, Matthew Marlowe, Raisin Biscuit, Rainick 1982, Jeff Johnson, Rowan McKickey, Cornster 671, and of course, thank you to Sahara for the music.